Imagine if your tools and agents spoke the same language. A single open protocol so agents and tools could just find each other and work together. That's the promise of Model Context Protocol, or MCP, and it's reshaping how we think about agent tooling. I'm Rob Folkrod, lead technical trainer at Microsoft, and this session is about integrating MCP tools with Azure AI agents. We'll begin with how MCP handles tool discovery, then we'll walk through setting up an MCP client and expose tools to an agent. Let's dive in. So in the earlier example, we built an agent that really exposed 3 tools, right? And those 3 tools, we had to build ourselves a function, right? So there was the function itself. Right now we're just saying a tool, but we had to build the function. And then we had to create build an integration where we had to describe the function itself and then describe all the parameters that were going to be passed into that function. And each one of those parameters also needed its own description. We built that as a little JSON document, and we did that 3 different times, right? And so this idea of requiring manual setup, so manual setup in terms of descriptions. Then, once we passed those 3 tools in, we repeated with a little bit more work in the dispatch, where the agent passed back an object that needed to then be conveyed to the underlying function. So we wrote this code that handled that exchange. And that was really only for 3 tools. It's not unheard of for some agents to have 10, 20, 40, 50 tools. And that's a lot of baggage that comes along with building those tools into your agent. Well, one of the advents lately has been this idea from Anthropic, which is the MCP, or Model Context Protocol. Model Context Protocol allows us to build an MCP server, and that server may be remote. That server may be on the local machine, but we build an MCP server, and that server has a menu, has a catalog of the tools that are available. It has the descriptions. It can handle the invocation of those functions on our behalf. And the agent can dynamically wire up that MCP server and say, hey, looks like I need to know what you do for this, get back that large menu of options, and then dynamically invoke them. That kind of takes us out of the middleman equivalent that we had when we were over here building all of that manual setup. So there's a number of ways of building MCP servers. Each platform, Java, Python, C#, they're all going to have a number of pre-built MCP servers that you can use to kind of start your application. Okay. But they're going to come down to having some sort on the server of some sort of tool definition, right? Some way of saying this function here can be invoked with these parameters, and these are the values that are necessary. Then an MCP client, which could be your agent, right, can then establish a session and start that session by saying, hey, may I have the collection of tools that are available? Gets back that list, and that list is now part of, you can consider it part of the instruction set. It's part of the context that that agent has. And when it starts to reason over those options, it can then identify, hey, I need to then invoke this function. And so that tool call can be made automatically by the MCP client. While an MCP client, its job is to list the tools and to invoke those tool calls, they could technically be made by anything. So at some point, you're going to build your agent, and in that agent, you're going to add a collection of one or more MCP tools. And so when you're building the agent itself, you will register the MCP client, or you'll register that tool as an option. In this exercise coming up, we will reference a MCP server a couple of different ways. First, we will hand a remote URL for a remote MCP server, and then we will work with one locally, handle negotiation between the two, and ensure that those work. Let's take a look. So up to this point, we've done the kind of the same old again. We have a Foundry project out there. That project has a couple of models that are already deployed. I am going to grab the project endpoint here. We'll need that momentarily. We'll chuck that onto the clipboard so we have it for future use. And let's take a look at our code. Well, let's get this one right out of the way before I lose it on the clipboard. We're going to open up our environment file here. We're going to drop in our project endpoint for the agent. We will remember to save, and we're using the same GPT 4.1 we've been using for the past n number of demos at this point. But again, we're doing this twofold. The first one is through this agent file. And this is going to invoke a remote MCP agent and a remote MCP server. So a couple of things that we are bringing in to make all of this work. This we have seen a few times already, the AI project client. What is changing a little bit is a couple of these. We're bringing in another type here, the MCP tool. This is going to be the wrapper around the description of the tool. But we're also reluctant, in many cases, to let agents just go. So there will be some sort of requirement to approve the use of these MCP tools. So one of the things that we will get is, or we will need, is the MCP approval response. Those will be two parts of what we are putting together in this example. Again, some of this we have seen time and time again. We are using the default Azure credential as our mechanism of authenticating. We are building an AI project client, giving that a little variable name here of project client. And then from project client, we are getting our hands on the open AI client. All of those will be disposed, will be cleaned up at the end of the code base. But for the first piece right here, we are bringing in our MCP tool. So using the MCP tool, we are going to give it a local name, API spec. We will give it the URL where to find it. In this case, the one that we're using is from Microsoft Learn. Go ahead and call into Learn to get up-to-date specs or API calls or internal documentation from the Microsoft realm. And you'll notice right here that we are asking very specifically here to require approval. So not just blindly going out and consuming all of these, right? No YOLO mode going on. In this particular scenario, we will require some form of approval. So we've defined this tool, much like in earlier examples, we defined individual function tools. Here we're defining the MCP tool. When we go build our agent create version, we'll give it a name. My agent is fine. We'll give it a definition. There's the model, here's the instructions, and then just the one tool, right? That MCP tool and all of that. Then we will start our conversation. In the conversation here, get a response back, OpenAI responses create, pass in that conversation ID. And we're going to just ask directly. In the past, we've been prompting ourselves. Here, we are just going to very quickly build a prompt. Give me the Azure CLI commands to create an Azure container app with a managed identity. So that should be somewhere in the documentation. When we go to run this, that'll be auto-prompted in there. Then the response will come back. if the response type is that of an MCP approval request. So in this scenario here, the agent has determined that we're going to call into this MCP server. We will then be asked, do we want to approve it? In our case, the name will be coming back, API specs, if you recall. Up at the top, we had labeled our MCP server API specs. It's very likely that you will have multiple tools, so we need to be able to clarify which one we're talking about. So if it is API specs, then we're going to simulate the approval process, but here, your application can then prompt the user. We'll give them the description. This is what they're looking for. This is what they're trying to do. Do you approve its use? If the answer is yes, then we will create an MCP approval response. MCP approval response, the approval is true, and associate it back with the item ID that we got back. At this point, then get a response, create, passing in that ID, and we should be able to then get the results running. So let's go take a look. Here we are in the console. We will do Python. We will run the agent. Make sure we're in the right directory before we get too far. We are not. There we go. Let's go one directory deeper. All right, quick edit here. We're going to go back to just before I open up the console, and we'll be in the right directory this time and be all set. All right, so I'm going to pause and then get started. All right, so let's take a look at this running. We're going to open up the terminal here, and let's give this a quick little run. So we'll go Python and agent. Here we go. And so we should say, hey, we've made contact with Foundry. Then we will establish the prompt. There we go. We now have our agent up and running. Agent has been created on the inside of Foundry. Then you saw we had that create conversation. Now we have a server-side conversation going on. We're just keeping that conversation ID. And then it asked, hey, to answer your question, which again, our question here was CLI commands to create an Azure container app. To answer that question, we're going to need to invoke this MCP server. So we were asked for a response. So we then gave an MCP approval response with the value of true. That was sent back to the agent. We're saying, yes, you may do that. The agent then invoked that and then got a response for us. And so here we see our CLI commands, AZ container app create, AZ container app identity assign. We've got our managed identity and a reference to where that information was found. So nice little start here to being able to invoke very specific tools. And while there are lots of pre-built MCP servers available to us, not everything that we're going to want will already have an MCP wrapper around it. So there will be a time in which we need to build our own servers. And whether you're doing that, we're going to have, obviously we have a Python example here. There are libraries in .NET and for Node that also have these capabilities. Here we're going to take a look at building our own MCP server. And so in this case, we're bringing in Python's fast MCP, building fast MCP, giving it the name of inventory. And inside of inventory, we have a collection of tools. Right? And so the first tool here is get inventory level. The values, it's fine, right? We'll return a dictionary here of values. We really don't care what the underlying code is, but we've got our inventory levels here. We have our weekly sales stats that are available. So these could be wrappers around functions. These could be wrappers around other API calls, right? But our server is pretty straightforward. Build a server and then get that server up and running. So now let's take a look at what it is required to invoke our server. So from our client app, we first need to do a little bit of legwork because that server is a standalone piece. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be writing just a little bit of code to start that server up in a process. Right? In a lot of other applications like Node, you would start your Node application, or you would start a separate C# project or a process going. So here we're saying, hey, I need to start up the server process that we have. And then grab a session from that MCP server. From that, we are grabbing a list of tools and saving that so we have a nice, easy collection of tools. So building our own, starting up the server, doing a quick little invocation, what tools do we have available to us, and then keeping that session up and going. Then let's build the agent now that we've got that information. Again, this we have seen a bunch of times. Default, Azure credential, building our project, getting our OpenAI client. Those are all the same. We will go to that session and ask that we saw earlier session to list tools, get back the MCP tools that are going to be responsible, and then build those into little function tool wrappers. Okay. Creating a dictionary of each one of those tools. And then we have to build the association with the functions locally. So in the previous example, the agent could invoke that URL directly. Here, this MCP server resides on our machine. There's no connection between that remote agent and our local machine. So we have to do similar to the previous demonstration. We have to build a wrapper around each one of the tools as a function tool. So here we're going through and mapping each one of the MCP tools as a function call. And then we're passing in that array here of MCP functions, which are just an array of function tools. The rest we've seen before, a definition, we're specifying the models, specifying some instructions here about how we're going to be handling inventory. As we've seen before, create a conversation. Then we will have a little prompting scenario here where we will go back and forth with the system. So we should be able to give this a run. Clear out the previous example here. We'll start up the client. Now, in doing so, remember the very first few lines of the client also started the server for us, so we don't have to do that separately. That should be running for us. We'll get that up and going. Now we've connected up with the tools themselves. We discovered those two functions that were available inside the MCP server. And they ask for a prompt. And so in our prompt right here, show me the current inventory levels for all products. This should then be discovered. There we go. We built in this an auto approval, very similar to the last time. So it did request an approval. We automatically approved it, and now we've got our inventory levels. We take a look here. We could ask follow-up questions that require a little bit of thought. Are there any products that should be restocked? And so it's then looking at our inventory level here of 6 moisturizer and 8 shampoo and 9 skin serum with our weekly sales. Look like those are lower than what we need. Ask another thoughtful question. Do you have anything that we should probably put on clearance? Anything that isn't selling incredibly well? Okay. And so here we see we've got weekly sales of 3 and 4 on the body spray and our cleanser, and we've got a pretty high inventory. So let's kind of offload those a little bit. And then again, follow-up questions like, hey, what's the best seller for this week? Again, it's calling into those tools, evaluating the responses. And so we can see responses coming back, right? So here we have seen really 2 ways of introducing more tools. MCP server that was remote, like the Microsoft Learn example, or here where we've built a MCP server that is local to our machine, and we have shared that with our agent. Later on, we will see there's a little bit of work having to be done to manage the MCP functions. We will see later on in this class some tools to simplify that a little bit. All right, MCP is pretty powerful. There's a lot that we can do with it. Let's do a quick little review here, and we'll take a look at a couple other options. But first, what role does the MCP server play in the MCP tool integration? Take a look real quick. Right. The server is the one that hosts those definitions and makes them available for discovery to the client. Okay. And then, how does MCP client retrieve the available tools? In here, there is typically a tool list call that is going to be made to get that tool catalog. All right, so we have seen a few things in this really important section. We've seen that MCP standardizes the tool discovery for a host of agents. MCP clients can use a list tools to find the underlying catalog of the tools that are being provided. And when we are using Foundry, we have a little helper function there, this function tool wrapper that wraps around the MCP tools themselves and allows us to pass those into Foundry. Today we connected agents to a whole new ecosystem of tools using MCP. We covered how MCP enables tool discovery, set up a client and server, plugged that into Foundry agents, and wired up MCP tools end to end. I appreciate you spending this time with me on Develop AI apps and agents on Azure. MCP is moving fast, and I hope the concepts and demos we work through give you a solid starting point. Stay curious. The protocols and ecosystems around agents are constantly evolving. Keep exploring, and you'll always have something new to bring back to work. There are many ways you can continue your learning journey, and I invite you to search for your next favorite topic on Microsoft Learn at aka.ms/learn.